Hello comrades, welcome to the Soviet journey. In this video, I have prepared a documentary-like video for you about the leaders of the Soviet Union. Let's watch together. First of all, we need to know that the Soviet Union has never had an official leader of the country. Those who were administrators as heads of state were practically administrators. Because the power that constitutes the political system in the country is shared among the Soviets throughout the country. So, what are these Soviets? As you know, the word Soviet means council or committee. That is to say, the basic unit of the state was established on the Soviets, organized from below. In other words, the political basis of the country was under the authority of the Soviets. The Upper Soviet could not make a decision unless the Lower Soviet made a decision. If a decision was not made in the lowest Soviet, the leaders at the top would naturally not be able to make a decision. The Soviet Union was not founded on top, but on the contrary, on a bottom-up basis. That is why all power was shared among these Soviets. It is important to know this before anything else. However, in practice, there were a number of high-level responsible people in every period. Although the Western world describes these people as leaders, it would be more accurate to call them authorities. These leaders usually had many responsibilities and powers through their positions as chairman of the Council of People's Commissars or General Secretary of the Communist Party. The word authority is very important here. There is a responsible institution that is responsible for implementing the decisions made by the sub-Soviets. That's why these institutions are positioned not as a leader, but in the best words, as a guide. At the founding of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was established as a vanguard party. The party is positioned as the main governing body of the state. What does vanguard party mean? Vanguard party means proletarian party. It means the party that guides and leads the proletariat. The party has a special importance as it is the vanguard of the entire proletariat in the Soviet state. The most important feature of Leninism is the concept of the vanguard party. While the concept of the party was not that prominent in Marx's time, Lenin advanced Marxism even further and brought the concept of the party to the fore. To summarize, the joint work of the Soviets and the party, that is, the joint work of the people and the vanguard party, constituted the basis of power of the Soviet Union. There was no king, no sultan, no army of leaders giving direction, but on the contrary, a system in which the state and the people work together. That is why in Soviet history the word leader must be used very carefully. The Council of People's Commissars was positioned as the place where all these Soviets converged. The chairman of the Council of People's Commissars can be compared to today's Prime Minister. Of course, all of these, that is, expressions such as Prime Minister, President, etc., are all arguments of Western states. These expressions do not exist in the Soviets. The equivalent of these people is Council Chairman. The chairman of the first Council of People's Commissars is Vladimir Lenin. If we are to talk about a leader, we can say that our first leader as the chairman of this council was Lenin. However, his health gradually deteriorated due to the armed attack in 1918, and he died in 1924. Afterwards, Joseph Stalin rose to a more authoritative position within the party. During the 1920s, the influence of the Central Committee of the Communist Party increased, and after Stalin's increased responsibility within the party, he also had a say in the government of the Soviet Union and the party. So we can name Stalin as the second leader. But I remind you once again that these people should be expressed in the sense of responsibility and authority. During this period, the party's Politburo functioned as the country's governing body, and its members held de facto leadership positions. So rather than just one leader, there were actually many leaders. This issue may seem a bit confusing to you, but the fact that the councils, that is, the institutions, are leaders will explain this issue. During this period, the main members of the Politburo were Stalin, Trotsky, Kamenev, Krestinsky, and the substitute members were Zinoviev, Bukharin, and Kalinin. All of these people were prominent figures in the Soviet administration. During that period, the Politburo had more authority than the Council of People's Commissars. As leader of the Politburo, Stalin, along with his supporters, who were the majority within the party, initiated a period of political repression known as the Great Purge, and opposition was generally silenced. Now let's talk about the World War II period. This period is a period that needs to be examined specifically in itself. In June 1941, when the Nazis launched an invasion attempt on the Soviets, the State Defense Department, the committee was established and Party Secretary Stalin was elected as the chairman of this committee. This committee practically governed the state and the people throughout the Great Patriotic War. These conditions are war conditions and are examined differently from the normal system. The State Defense Committee is a state of emergency institution and its powers are very wide. This committee is responsible for issuing many orders, from military orders to mobilization orders. After the end of World War II and after Stalin's death in March 1953, leadership institutions changed. Nikita Khrushchev, who was elected as the party's first secretary to the party's Central Committee, openly criticized Stalin and his policies at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party in 1956, and a process began in which these leadership approaches of the Stalin era were condemned. This was the first time since the country's founding that this had happened, and Khrushchev faced major opposition. The party cadres of the period perceived this process as destructive, destabilizing, and a deviation from the fundamental principles of Marxism-Leninism. As a result, Khrushchev made many enemies both within the party and among the people. As a political reflection of this, a faction was formed that Khrushchev called the Anti-Party Group, composed of former senior Soviet officials who tried unsuccessfully to remove Khrushchev from office in 1957. Following this development, Khrushchev began to make political decisions himself without discussing them with the Politburo or seeking their approval. However, as criticism against him increased, he announced that he was leaving his post as party first secretary in 1964. His close colleague Leonid Brezhnev was elected as the new party's first secretary in the vote held on the same day. Alexei Kosygin also became the new chairman of the Council of Ministers. What we call the Council of Ministers is the renamed version of the Council of People's Commissars after the war. Between 1964 and 1977, a tripartite system of government was established in the country, formed by Brezhnev, Kosygin and Nikolai Podgorny as collective leadership. This was a situation not seen in First World countries. Therefore, it sometimes caused confusion in terms of representation. In the Western world, it has always been a mystery as to who was the leader of the USSR or the person in charge of Soviet foreign policy. This period of triumvirate would later be called the period of stagnation by Gorbachev. According to Gorbachev, there was low socio-economic efficiency in the country and there was an external appearance that the country's rulers were old people. There was no explicit reference in the constitution to the post of Party Secretary General. Therefore, after the death or resignation of a Soviet leader, the person who would assume this office needed the support of the party's Politburo Central Committee or another party apparatus. According to the country's last constitution, the 1977 constitution, the chairman of the Council of Ministers was also the head of government. The chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet was also the head of state. The chairman of the Council of Ministers was equivalent to the Prime Minister, and the chairman of the Presidium was equivalent to the President. But the situation of the party is very different from the Western states. Mikhail Gorbachev was elected to the post of General Secretary by the Politburo on March 11, 1985. Gorbachev, who was 54 years old when he was elected, was much younger than other leaders. After taking office, Gorbachev clearly stated that economic development slowed down in the same year. The country entered a period of stagnation and inadequate living standards prevailed. He became the first Soviet leader to do this. He initiated policies of restructuring called perestroika and transparency called glasnost. He abolished the central planning that formed the basis of the Soviet Union economy and allowed state enterprises to determine their own production. He enabled private investment in businesses that were previously not allowed to the private sector and facilitated the entry of foreign investment into the country. These issues were fundamental tenets of Marxism-Leninism, and Gorbachev was determined to abolish them all. In March 1990, the office of President of the Soviet Union was created as the highest Soviet political office by reforming the office of Party Secretary General. Simultaneously with the establishment of the presidency, it was decided to abolish the concept of vanguard party in the Soviet constitution. That is, the Communist Party would no longer have a leading role over the state and the people. This was putting dynamite into the foundations of the Soviets. The party and the Soviets were being crushed by the orders of higher institutions. Of course, as with every change, there were major objections to this, and even a coup attempt was made in 1991 under the leadership of Yanayev, but this attempt was suppressed and the Soviet Union subsequently collapsed. Yes, comrades, I wanted to tell you about the leadership issue in the history of the Soviet Union. I hope it was understandable. At this station on our Soviet journey, I talked to you about leadership in the Soviets. There are many Soviet-themed videos on our channel, so don't forget to follow, subscribe and support our Soviet Journey channel. Goodbye for now.